many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. We are going to get into some breaking news. There are multiple reports coming in right now on Paris shootings, and I say shootings with the plural. The latest out of the AP, White House says Obama briefed on Paris, and let me make sure this has been updated. Yep, it's updated according to this. Let's go ahead and refresh here. Now it says the latest UK's Cameron says shocked by Paris attacks. So the latest on shootings and explosions in Paris. British Prime Minister David Cameron said he's shocked by the Paris attacks and violence. Cameron said on Twitter, "Our thoughts and prayers are with the French people. We will do whatever we can to help." French police say that at least 35 were killed in multiple acts of violence took place in Paris Friday night, including shootings at restaurants and a hostage taking at a music theater. An earlier report, a White House official says President Barack Obama has been briefed on the attacks. Paris official says counterterrorism advisor Lisa Monaco briefed the president. The official was not authorized to talk about the private discussion and demanded anonymity. Obama is slated to travel to Paris at the end of the month to attend a United Nations conference on climate change. Earlier report, hundreds of people spilled onto the field of the Stade de France Stadium after explosions were heard nearby during a friendly match between the French and German national soccer teams. A stadium announcer made an announcement over the loudspeaker after the match, telling fans to avoid certain exits due to events outside without elaborating. At first, prompted some panic, but then the crowds just walked dazed, hugging each other and looking at their phones for the latest news on the violence. Many appeared hesitant to leave amid the uncertainty after France's deadliest attacks in decades. Former U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Michael Chertoff says it is too early to know exactly what's happening in Paris. Social media posts from purported ISIS supporters could indicate that there was a group waiting for this, but it could be a group watching. Chertoff told said in a interview with MSNBC Friday night, I don't think we can say this proves anything. But again, it supports the idea that it's terrorism. And there's more reports that we're going to get into here covering that. Um, there is, oh, excuse me. Let me find this clip I had. I'm not finding it. Let me see if I can find it here real quick. No. I kind of want to get into, this whole thing with this immigration. We've been talking about it for a while now. You look at the problem and where it's really starting. We have been involved in the Middle East for years now. And everywhere that we have gone, we destabilize the country. We basically had a military lockdown on those territories where we treated those citizens, all of them, as they are criminals because, well, you can't tell the difference because these people are foreign, their culture is foreign, and maybe the way they interact is foreign. So you inherently tend to treat all of them the same, The males with the big beards, well, they might be bad too. So we create even more tension there, and then we try to put our puppet government in place there, which then in turn people there don't trust that government. You destabilize it, you create enemies, and you create this vacuum for even more radical people to come in. And then you have these radicals that basically say what they're going to do. And then everything they're doing there is even worse than what we were doing, causing a mass exodus. And within that exodus is part of that radical group with those special plans to expand their power. And I think we are getting very, very, very close to this, where we're going to not only see it in Paris, the rest of Europe's going to destabilize. Here's a FBI report out of Judicial Watch. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has nearly 1,000 active probes involving the terrorist group Islamic State of Iraq and Syria inside the United States. Dozens of law enforcement officials disclosed in a letter to President Obama. The officials are elected sheriffs in Colorado, making a case against the administration's plan to transfer terrorists held at the U.S. military prison in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, to facilities in the state. 41 of the Colorado's elected sheriffs fired off the letter after two federal prisons in Florence supermax in the U.S. penitentiary, along with a state complex near Kansas City, were reviewed by the Pentagon for the potential transfer. The plan is part of the president's longtime promise to close the top security compound at the U.S. naval base in southeast Cuba. The big question is, what will the government do with the remaining captives? Indisputably the world's most dangerous terrorist. Just a few weeks ago, Obama's defense secretary said that around half of the remaining 112 prisoners at Gitmo must be locked up indefinitely. They include 9/11 masterminds, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi Banal Shib. Yeah, I'm not even going to try to say the rest of them. Basically, they want to bring them to the United States. Even though we have 1,000 active ISIS probes in the United States right now. Earlier today, Obama, ISIS is not getting stronger. We have contained them. Contain them? You let them loose on Europe. They've grown so big that they are spreading into Europe. Syria might be able to get them out, only because you now have Obama go, oh, I need to keep up with Russia, so now I'll actually go after ISIS. When I really think it's even not as successful as they're trying to make it out to be. Let me see if I can pull up another one here about the attacks here. This from CNN. Paris attacks, 60 reported killed, hostage situation ongoing. Paris, dozens of people are reported dead after a series of what appeared to be coordinated attacks across Paris late Friday. CNN will update the story as information comes in. Latest was at 6:06. French President François Hollande, in an address to the nation, said he had declared a state of emergency, meaning borders will be closed. We have to show compassion and solidarity, and we also have to show unity and keep our cool. France must be strong and great, he said. The Paris Prefecture of Police is instructing residents to stay home, said via Twitter that people should stay inside unless there is an absolute necessity. French authorities have launched a terrorism investigation. Eric Pelletier, a reporter with the La Parisienne, tells CNN Paul Cruikshank there has been no official claim for responsibility, though ISIS has applauded the attacks on Twitter. Cruikshank reports this is an attack not just on Paris, not just on the people of France, but an attack on all humanity and the universal values we share. Barack Obama said at the White House he called the attacks an outrageous attempt to terrorize innocent civilians. At least 60 people have died in the attack, CNN affiliate BFM TV reported. At least 6 shootings took place in Paris and 3 explosions took place at the Stade de France in Saint Denis. Late Friday, CNN affiliate BFM TV said 2 or 3 gunmen entered the concert hall while opening fire on law enforcement. BFM TV reported. A source earlier told CNN there were 6 to 8 hostage takers, citing a person they were talking to inside the venue. Paris police tell CNN there were 3 attacks. Attackers reportedly used AK-47 automatic weapons. CNN's Jim Bitterman, who is based in Paris, reports a producer who is at the Bataclan tells him that police are firing at a rooftop position near the venue. And there's more there, including the original stories. Drudge Report's keeping pretty good update on this going on right now. But I kind of wanted to touch on something here. You remember this whole Fast and Furious thing? We had this whole Fast and Furious thing where we were running guns to the drug cartels, the gangs. And around that same time, we had Barack Obama come out and go, why would you want an assault rifle? Why would you need that for defense? Even though pistols are, used in shootings more. Of course, they want to go after the scary looking gun. Well, what we didn't really know is to the extent that they were gun running to Al Qaeda or Al Qaeda affiliates. What was, slowly coming to terms in Libya. You start having all this buildup of ISIS. ISIS didn't just pop up overnight. This was a gradual buildup. And we find out that, they're basically allowing weapons in the hands of ISIS. Now we also have a Europe is basically, all the countries of Europe basically are disarmed for the most part. Running guns to ISIS, flood of migrants into Europe. I'm sure many weapons are making it into Europe right now in the hands of extremists. And now they're going to reap that. Well, we have this flood. Why isn't it happening here in America? Well, it is. Not to the extent. One, because the drug cartels are acting in a ideological term where God's telling them to take over the world. That kind of helps it be a little bit more localized. Mainly fighting against each other for power over the drug trade, not the world. That and you're not just going to cross the border into Texas and think you're going to have the run of the mill in Texas. A lot of gun owners in Texas. Probably not going to happen. The difference is ideology and a belief system, and of course we were allowing drug cartel to get AK-47s at the most. We're dropping AK-47s, grenades, rocket launchers, and all this all over the Middle East, saying, hey, we're giving them to these ally groups that are going to help us fight Assad. Oh, and ISIS. And it seems more and more that we have ISIS fighting Assad. We're seeing our weapons, vehicles, tents, everything ending up in the hands of ISIS. And now they're making their way into Europe. When governments tell you, we'll make it safer, give up your gun, then the guns won't be there. Except when the criminals get them, but let's not talk about that. And then where are they? They're there to mark off the crime scene, stand there with their guns, feeling a lot safer than you felt while there's some crazed man shooting people. Europe, basically a gun-free zone for these people to run around. I think Europe is seeing just the very beginning of a fundamental transformation to their whole society, their whole culture. And I don't think they're going to be happy about this. I think a lot of this has to do with the creation of a more world government. But I also think that kind of like what's going on with the colleges right now, they don't understand how this is going to end up playing out. And I don't think it's going to play out quite to their benefit. They're not going to be completely devastated, but they're not going to be happy. These people like Soros talking about we see the borders as an obstacle. Is going to find out that his private property borders are going to eventually be a bridge to a point where he's not going to have anywhere to feel safe. And this is something you really see how the whether it be the communists, the socialists, the fascists, they always try to use the extreme people to get what they want. But what you find out, the extreme people tend to take things to the extreme. And I think we see that with what they try to do in the Middle East, what they try to do in Ukraine, what they try to do in Iraq, what they try to do in Egypt. Tends to backfire. Okay, we're going to kind of move along. I'll get back to some more coverage of Paris on the grip of multiple terrorist attacks here after this Ron Paul Liberty report that we're going to get into. And this is Mythbusters debunking Bernie Sanders, Mark Rubio, and more. Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today will be Chris Rossini, who is the editor of the RonPaulLibertyReport.com. And once again, he will bring up the subject of some myths that exist out there and see if we can sort that all out. Chris, welcome to the program today.
Dr. Paul, it's great to be with you as always.
Well, good. I guess it's not too hard for you to look around in the media and find out so many things that the politicians and the pundits do and say that are based on just fallacies, if not only fallacies, myths, and sometimes outright lies that are either out of ignorance or out of purpose. So what do you have today to suggest we talk about?
Well, we'll get started with Bernie Sanders, which is a hot topic. He's very popular with his constituency and fans. And he's an interesting character because oftentimes he'll diagnose a problem correctly. It's just his prescriptions are way off and kind of scary. So I have a couple of quotes from him that you can address. And he starts by saying, "I don't believe it is a terribly radical idea to say that someone who works 40 hours a week should not be living in poverty." Now, that's a good diagnosis. However, he wants to make a terrible law even worse by raising the minimum wage up to $15 an hour. And I have another quote from him, which is another scary one. He says, "I will fight for 12 weeks of paid family leave and medical leave." So please address these, Doctor.
Well, I know Bernie pretty well, and we worked together many times in the Congress, and it was usually on the subject of corporate benefits and corporate welfare. And, of course, we could agree. It was interesting because, his diagnosis of the corporations getting benefits and how the Federal Reserve System works. So we would attack welfareism for the big corporations. And then when he starts talking about, the poor, I agree with a lot of that too. There is a lot of poor people out there. And I imagine he truly has sympathy for these people and want to help them. But where the real fallacy is, where the myth is, that comes from the left and somebody especially who declares himself a socialist, is they base all their answers on the fact that the government has authority and they have wisdom and they can correct problems. But instead of saying that they want to correct the problems by eliminating all the mistakes of government, they don't look at that. Governments, from their viewpoint, can't make mistakes. It's only the rich people in the marketplace who are always taking advantage of the poor that make the mistakes. So therefore, you have to have government to take control, restrain people, and redistribute the wealth through force. I think the one thing that they never pay any attention to, and I don't know whether they probably think of this differently, but they shouldn't. But everything they support is supported through violence, the violence of government. They probably believe in the non-aggression principle for individuals, that you shouldn't rob and kill each other, but they never hold back. Matter of fact, they're pretty enthusiastic about government, but they would never concede the fact that if they use the IRS and guns or the Federal Reserve to dilute the money supply as something that's being vicious and mean and nasty. But they don't see this as force. They see this as a proper use of government. But they complain a lot about individuals, the way they act in the free market. But what do? They take some individuals who wheel and deal and use influence and all kinds of things to get in office. Then they fully trust the people, in government. So he doesn't believe in less government. He just believes in changing management, where a libertarian believes that individuals can take care of themselves so much better. So whether it's a minimum wage law or whatever they propose is all based on government violence. And there's no proven evidence that it's any benefits. The liberal and the socialist believe that they can regulate the economy. They're a little less likely to regulate personal behavior in a social way, but they want to regulate everything in a personal way on economic policies. For instance, the minimum wage. That's a contract. So what they're doing is they're coming in with the force of government and denying the right of an individual to be employed. So if an individual comes in to somebody's office and say, I want to work for you, I have no skills, and I'll work for $6 an hour, and the businessman and the individual agree, well, no, there's a prohibition. And they don't see this at all. And there's so much evidence to show that government intervention is a failure. And they refuse to look at history and say that where has been the greatest prosperity? We've never had a perfectly free society. Some societies are freer than others. But the freer society, the wealthier the society, the larger the middle class. And yet they're totally blind to this, and they want to totally depend on government force and violence and this belief that people in government and the bureaucrats can make no mistakes. I claim that the liberals and those who believe in strong socialism are very violent people because they like guns. They don't want you and I to have a gun, but they do want the government to have guns. So if you aren't obedient to the regulations that are arbitrary and very damaging, and if you don't pay your taxes to support some war or some other program, then they send the IRS with a gun and you end up in jail. And we know what can happen there when that happens. People are sometimes put in prison for life just for talking about income tax, like Aaron Schiff was. He literally was put into a cell and left to die with a death sentence because he talked about the illegality and the authoritarianism based on our income tax. So I think this is a great myth that interventionism and liberalism and socialism can increase prosperity, because the history is loud and clear that the more government intervention you have in economic policy, the more poor you have. But you don't have to say, well, that means they can run roughshod over us. No, the rules are very strict. You can't use violence. You can't steal. You have to live up your contracts. You have to have honest money in a free society, and you don't bail out anybody. And that, to me, would be a much better system.
It has done its damage. As a matter of fact, we have, at this moment, tens of millions, up to 90 million I've seen, people unemployed in the United States. And a large factor that has contributed to that is government and its regulations on hiring people. They've made it such a chore to hire somebody. And it's not just the federal government. It's state government, local government. Employers have to think twice before hiring somebody. Right. Are they going to sue me? Is it going to be illegal to fire them? So right now the government the Supreme Court more specifically, is looking at forcing companies to offer contraceptive insurance coverage to their employees. And this is another government intervention. And we have Gretchen Borschelt, and she's vice president at the National Women's Law Center. And she says women deserve insurance coverage of birth control no matter where they work or go to school. The Supreme Court must stop these efforts to undermine women's health. Please address that, Dr. Paul.
Well, I think there are a couple important issues here. One, overall, which you alluded to, is where do they get this authority, and why can anybody insist that they need something or want something and they have a right to it, and the Supreme Court should rule in favor of somebody who wants to rob somebody else. So that's the overall principle, the moral principle, and the economic principle. But, the case that's coming up before the Supreme Court right now is pursued by Christian right people who say, well, it's a violation of their religious principles to be forced to pay for or to sell contraceptives and be involved, which they're absolutely right. But where I think they're drifting away from a sound argument is the fact that they're narrowing it down to the First Amendment and their religious beliefs. In a way, that's part of it. But I think they actually weaken their case by saying this is religious liberty. Because how do you do it from a religious viewpoint if you have 10 different religions and a lot of varieties of each one of those religions and say we're going to have to try to satisfy them? The protection has to be much broader than that. It has to be the protection of a voluntary contract. So if an insurance company doesn't want to pay this, pay for abortions, and the taxpayer doesn't want to, why should anybody be forced into it? So it's this mandate. It's the mandate and mentality of Obamacare that is so bad. And at times it violates economic principles. It violates religious principles. But those are secondary to the overall principle that government should never interfere with a voluntary contract. And so often liberals are pretty good and progressives are good at understanding this in a social and a sexual and a religious sense. The government shouldn't be involved in interfering with that activity. But as soon as it comes to economics, they think that the government should. A person who's concerned about liberty and part of the liberty movement understand that all liberty is the same. Social liberty is the same as economic liberty, and they should be allowed to pursue this, but they should never be forced to pay. So the Supreme Court in this case, you know, if they had to rule on the religious view, I can see where they can do it. But I think that's way too narrow. It should be broad. We should be defending ourselves against forced, contracts with people and being forced into systems where the government dictates everything, and get rid of this whole idea that people who need something, they need health care, they need birth control pills, and never ask, where does this come from? And of course, the government will give it to them, and never really asking how much force is used to take it from somebody else, and having the government participate in the fraud and deceit that leads to these kind of problems. And of course, what it ends up doing, though, eventually a system like that runs out of money, and then there's a big fight over the remaining wealth that's in the country, and that's what's going on now. These cases are so discouraging because they shouldn't even exist. You know, this whole idea to argue in the Supreme Court, at the Supreme Court, whether or not somebody has to pay somebody else's birth control pills, and also for their abortion. That's an outrage. In a society that is dedicated to liberty, you wouldn't be hearing about cases like this.
That's correct. And in a society dedicated to liberty, we also wouldn't have a Federal Reserve. And that's our next subject, which is a subject near and dear to your heart and mine as well. We're going to go to resident neocon over at the Washington Post, Jennifer Rubin. And she chimes in on Audit the Fed, which is, she's usually talking about war, but now she has something to say about the Federal Reserve. And she says, audit the Fed is an empty phrase that serves as a dog whistle to the conspiracy-minded right. Now, why would she be talking about the Fed?
That to me doesn't sound like a sound economic argument. It sounds like, if we call somebody else a name, all of a sudden we're going to discredit them. But, Rubin is known, and they don't see you qualify. You cheat a little bit. You said she's a neoconservative, accurately, of course. But no, she's called the conservative over there to have the conservative position, because even though the neocons name themselves, they don't like to be called neocons because it stirs up a few ideas. And one of them is the establishment and the control of the Federal Reserve. But it also shows that many people, both right and left, Republican and Democrats, support the Federal Reserve System. Otherwise, we wouldn't have such a struggle. So when somebody like this tries to slip it in and have the credibility of a conservative, and there are other conservatives that are well known in this country who aren't supportive of auditing the Fed. But I think when you hear this, I think it's a little bit encouraging, because there's an ongoing process right now, as we have contributed to in our campaign for liberty and Rand's bill in the Senate, getting ready that maybe we may well get that vote in the Senate. And they're terrified of it. If they ever find out who's controlling the money and who's benefiting, who's getting the bailouts, this would be big news. So they cannot contest what we're saying, how important it is. They know how important it is. This is why they are determined to try to discredit anybody who takes this up, and that is exactly what she's trying to do, and steer the argument away from the economic policy. She doesn't want an audit the Fed. Well, 85% of the American people want audit the Fed, even though they wouldn't agree with us that we ought to just get rid of the Federal Reserve. They haven't provided any real long-term benefits. They've caused all the chaos that we have today. And so they don't want that to happen. The establishment, the bankers, big government, the military-industrial complex, all the progressives and all the big government conservatives. I mean, I don't think for a minute that the conservatives and the Democrats in the Congress will be enthusiastic about auditing the Fed. But the people have to put the pressure on there. But the big fallacy here is she is just camouflaging the whole issue, trying to steer it away from it being a sound economic policy and something that's of interest to the middle class and something to curtail the special interest to the rich. So she has to come and try to discredit any of us who would suggest otherwise.
Yes, that is true. And let's finish up with one more quote here, Dr. Paul. This is from another conservative with air quotes, of course. This is Marco Rubio, and this is one on increasing military spending, just what we need, right? So he says he wants to modernize our forces to remain on the cutting edge of the land, sea, air, cyberspace, and outer space domains. How about we go for the whole universe, right, Dr. Paul?
Right.
Think about that.
Well, it's good for jobs. Think how many jobs he's going to create, and then we can send them all to outer space. I'd like to send, like I once said, send all these politicians that promote these ideas to outer space. That's where they belong, because it's crazy. Where's he going to get the money? I mean, the country is broke. We're in the middle of a recession. Half the people are unemployed. Half of the young people live with their parents, and the medical care system is breaking down. I mean, it's so precarious. So he's proposing $1 trillion increase. Of course, he wouldn't agree with that, because what he's saying is he has to restore the original budget. But there were some proposed decreases in the increases. He doesn't even want to do that. No, it really is a net increase in $1 trillion over a period of time. And he represents big banks. He represents the war profiteers, the people in the military-industrial complex. And he represents world government, because we have to take care of the world. Look how many things are going on in the Middle East, the NATO. We're the one that supply the manpower and all the money and all the bombs and stirring up all the troubles and support all the coups. So this is representative of runaway spending, and I think right now that the people are waking up because we're out of money and we're going to have to end it. But Chris, I think maybe that might have to be our last question for the day. But I want to thank you very much for being with us today, and let's keep breaking open these myths that are floating around and all the false pretenses that exist.
My pleasure as always, Dr. Paul.
Well, good. And I want to thank the audience today for tuning into the Liberty Report. And I hope these few comments are helpful in trying to understand how the system in Washington works, because it is based on lies, it's based on fallacies, economic fallacies, it's based on misplaced good intentions, it's based on political power, and a lot of these come together. But I would say that the most important thing for us to gain in an understanding are the economic fallacies that refute the idea that a minimum wage law is going to be helpful. And there's so many arguments against that. All these interventions, they look at the short term, but they never look at the alternative. Who pays for it? Who suffers? Who's on the other end of the deal? And when they realize this, they'll realize that government intervention spending, deficits, printing money, all these things do not help. And we're moving into an era where it becomes very, very clear, and even our prestige around the world will be severely challenged in the near future. That's why answers have to be provided. They have to be found in the cause of liberty, sound money, limited government, and a policy in foreign affairs that would lead us to a world of peace. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. And you can also go to ronpaullibertyreport.com. Go there and check them out. Now, with this whole Bernie Sanders thing, this whole socialist, this whole someone needs to pay us because we've tried to make a career out of cashier service at McDonald's. Or you can't find anything else because our economy sucks because our government's intervened in it so much that it's drove it down. We have these college students that are out here. We want free college. We want this. And we want that. Who's going to pay for it? And you get some that come out and go, well, we'll tax more. Well, who you going to tax? Well, the 1%. Well, if you tax the 1% and 100% of, it wouldn't work. Well, I don't believe that. And we have some go, you just tax everyone more, which is kind of what Bernie says. He doesn't say just the 1%. He wants to tax everyone. Because at least he understands that just taxing the 1% won't pay for all this crap. Basically, everybody must work, do whatever I tell you to do, and we'll divvy out the money when it's available. And that's basically what socialism has to do. Because once you get that power, which usually happens through some type of Marxist communist type government, you'd think our spending's out of control now. Wait until that happens. Which we've been on that socialist, communist, fascist. It's basically just mattered who's been in power, but there's been slow influence of authoritarian type attitudes into the political field from long back. And you're really seeing a digress from what allowed people to even have the ability to talk about, to conversate, to even have these type of discussions in these meetings. And it's been a free society that's allowed that to happen. But they ignore that fact to push their idea of this utopia that will never happen. Most libertarians, even though mainstream might try to convince you that they believe in some utopia where no government is needed, everybody just gets along and prances around. No, we say that government does not do any better. If anything, they do worse, or they contribute to the problem that societies face. They compound it. They compound it because they're nothing more than a whole bunch of dysfunctional people trying to tell a whole bunch of other dysfunctional people how to live. Because we're all in some way dysfunctional to the next person, or weird to the next person, or offensive to the next person. So we can continue to go down this path where we fight each other over everything, or we go, hey, why do I really care what that person does at home and how they live their life? I might not agree with it. If they ask for my opinion, I'll tell it to them. I don't want to fight them over different ways of living. If you truly want to make a more peaceful society, you have to become a contributing member to that, and you have to also understand that you're not going to stop all criminals. But the best thing you can do is be prepared where you can defend yourself. And, this is completely opposite of what they want to teach. And then you have these kids that go, well, I want my free college, my free education. okay, who's going to pay? Well, the taxpayers. So basically, and then when you are no longer in college and you're working a job, then you'll be the taxpayer paying for the next generation of kids instead of you taking out a loan for your college and paying it back in time you get to that age where you would still be paying for um, you know, the next generation of kids, and then, well, when they graduate, the next generation. Oh, what? And then when they graduate, the next generation. So you're paying for multiple generations that way instead of paying for it yourself. Now we also have to look at the other problem where tuition's just crazy high. Why is it crazy high? Subsidies, government welfare to the institutions, and the whole school loan, and um, basically because everybody has to have an opportunity. No one can earn a opportunity. They must just automatically have an opportunity. They will give a loan to anyone. Oh, you want $100,000 loan, and you're going in the field of something that's probably going to make you 30,000 a year. Sure, we'll do it. And then you can't file bankruptcy. So we have a system where government is involved to the point that it drives a situation where they want government to get involved and make it free. Which means that now, instead of having a situation where if we start taking government out of the education system altogether, federal government especially, get to a situation where universities have to thrive on how good they are. They can charge depending on how good they are. You could work your way through college, which you used to be able to. A lot of these colleges wouldn't offer a lot of the BS classes that you get a degree, but there's nowhere for you to work with that degree. It didn't actually make you more knowledgeable for whatever field you get into. We have a complete problem with our education system, and first thing to do would be to get government out of it. I got some updates here. Military being deployed around Paris. This out of the AP. Let me get to it here. Maybe. Well, it's saying out of the AP that they are going to be putting military in place. Drudge report. French president says he will close borders. Another one, gunmen shout Allah Akbar. It's for Syria. ISIS celebrates Paris in flames. Hollanday evacuated from stadium. wish the best for people affected by that over there. And a lot of this isn't those citizens' fault. We all bear some fault in allowing our governments to run amok like they do. But again, this has been something that a lot of us might be the first generation or second generation to really be awake to what's going on. We are the generations that are growing up with the blatant, just in your face transformation of America away from freedom. To a point, just from when I was a kid to now, the way kids are handled, the way citizens and law enforcement interact has gotten so out of hand that, you know, I'm surprised that I'm not more, nervous around people, law enforcement, others. It's one of those things where it's a gradual thing to try to condition you into this stuff. But all it takes is that step back, take a view of where not your life, but where society has gone through the progression of your life. And it's really amazing where we are now. I want to take a second to read this article here. And this was out of CNN Money, money.cnn.com. Americans are buying tons of gold. Not only gold, but silver too. But it says here, this summer's market mayhem caused Americans to buy gold bars and gold coins at levels unseen since the financial crisis. When people are scared about the economy and financial markets, they rush to gold. Boy, were they worried in recent months. U.S. demand for gold bars and gold coins surged 207% during the third quarter. The World Gold Council said on Thursday the skyrocketing demand signaled a level of interest in gold investment not seen since the global financial crisis, the group said. The U.S. Mint backs up the assessment. It said gold eagle coins surged nearly 400,000 ounces last quarter, the highest level in more than 5 years. Bargain shopping for gold. Gold watchers chalk up Americans' newfound love for gold to two major factors. Prices looked relatively cheap and financial markets were in turmoil. In July, gold prices fell below $1,100 an ounce for the first time in 5 years. Apparently, many people decided it was too good of an opportunity to pass up. People were bargain shopping. There's no question about it. Now, I've seen this too, and I know just from word of mouth there are a lot of wealthier people that are seriously taking gold extremely serious. They don't really want to talk about it, which kind of, I've always been someone that always praised gold and silver, definitely for long term, and when financial crisis happened, when the artificial, trust in the dollar goes up, yeah, gold prices are going to go down, silver prices are going to go down. But when the realization comes back that's that piece of paper by the Federal Reserve, that's a note, not an actual dollar. Yeah, that's really not worth anything, and the world's even looking at it that way. The confidence in the dollar goes down, and gold and silver go up. all commodities will eventually go up, but gold and silver usually will signal it and grow at a better rate than most commodities. Depending on the situation, you have a drought, of course, you're going to look at food commodities. But long term, gold and silver. When silver dimes were around, when that was the norm, you could get silver dimes. That silver dime would buy you a gallon of gas. The worth of that silver dime today will buy you a gallon of gas. And you look at most other commodities, oil, food, lumber, timber, all those things get used up. Unless you have somewhere you can hoard a whole bunch of other commodities for years. But you can with gold and silver. Why? Because gold and silver is a global trading platform. It's the true dollar of the world. And that's why you see Russia and China flaunting their gold. Before all this, going to a different currency for the petrodollar and the world trade currency, Russia and China were buying up gold at tremendous rates. Now they're flaunting it. They're sending a message, basically. One way you can always help out this broadcast is by helping yourself out, for one. If you go to antityrannynews.com/metal, that will take you to Amagi Metals. I partnered with Amagi Metals, my choice for buying gold and silver. Right now, they have a pretty good price deal going on. Of course, silver is down around $14.71 an ounce. Gold, $11.02 and 69 cents there per ounce. Right now, they have a Canadian silver going for $17.26. They have the silver Britannia coin, $19. American silver eagle, 18. And what's something that I always liked about Amagi is they always made sure that they had something in stock for those that can't afford to buy large amounts at one time. They also have 1 gram silver chips, little tiny bars. They also have junk silver, mainly, currency, those silver dimes, like I was talking about. Get those, check them out, and when you purchase something using that link, antityrannynews.com/metal, you're also helping out this broadcast. So go check them out, see if there's anything gold, silver. They even have base metal where you can buy copper. And I think the copper a lot of times is a good gift too, to get young ones interested in collecting silver, gold, coins. It's something I tend to see really kind of sparks their eye when they get a 1 ounce thing of copper, nice shiny copper. They love feeling like they have something that's worth something, which one day it will be. We've seen what happened to copper prices there a few times. But go check them out. Don't forget to go to ucy.tv and click that UCY support tab. A lot of alternative networks out there have come and gone. UCY has been able to stand strong among the competition, and if it wasn't for UCY, a lot of us wouldn't have a platform to broadcast to you. So definitely support UCY. Go to ucy.tv and click the UCY support tab. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get into this clip I had here from We Are Change. I'm going to have to go to their channel here real quick. Now, hold on. This one was 4 days ago, and this one's tracking the New World Order's militaries and wars. And this was also with Next News Network. Escalations with China could lead to a global war. I want to get into this.
This is Rudowski of WeAreChange.org, and I'm joined by Gary Franchi of the Next News Network. In this video, we're going to talk about the rising tensions between the United States and China, troop movements all over the world as intercontinental missiles are flying through LA, freaking everybody out. We're going to break it down here with you with rational facts and evidence. Now, Gary Franchi, I have known for too long. There's only a handful of people that have been involved in this movement as long as me and Gary. Gary has gone through some name changes. He changes the name of his organization just like P. Diddy changes his name. It was Lone Lantern. It was Restore the Republic. But now it's the Next News Network, and I trust his analysis, especially when it comes to all the important world events that have been happening. Now, Gary, thank you for coming on, and I really want to take just your analysis of everything that has been happening between China and the United States. What the hell's going on?
Well, first of all, China decided they were going to start building up these artificial islands in the Spratly Island chain. And at the onset, it seemed harmless, but then they started to look more like military bases in the middle of the sea. So the Pentagon got a hair up their kazoo and decided that they were going to go over there and investigate. First, they sent some spy planes. The Chinese said, hey, get the hell out of our sovereign airspace. But because they created this new island chain, they have now created their own sovereign zone. It extends 12 miles outside of the actual islands themselves. So now, just last week, the United States sent a destroyer, basically a guided missile destroyer, into the region to go ahead and test the actual boundaries, to push the boundaries of the Chinese. So the USS Lassen went into the area, breached the border, the sovereign border of China, and China said, look, you guys are poking us, stop provoking us, we will use force if necessary. We will protect our islands if we feel that we are under threat. Well, certainly nothing developed in that regard. There was no escalation as far as militarily. Now, what was interesting was at the very same time, the USS Ronald Reagan was in the Sea of Japan. And at that moment, the Russians sent up aircraft over the USS Ronald Reagan. When they did that, they flew within 1 mile and 500 feet of the Reagan. The Reagan scrambled F-18 fighter jets into the air because the Russians were not communicating with the Reagan. At the very same time, you have a Chinese attack sub shadowing that Reagan as well. So you have the USS Lassen going in and violating China's now newly claimed sovereign territory, which the United States does not believe it exists. They do not recognize this sovereign territory. That's why they're going to go ahead and say, we're going to go do this freedom of navigation waterway test just to piss off the Chinese. And what do the Chinese do? They start shadowing the USS Ronald Reagan in the Sea of Japan. To complicate matters even more, Luke, the Australians have decided they're going to do the exact same thing, but they're going to take it up one more notch. they're actually going to do live-fire military exercises with China. So a couple weeks ago, we put out a false flag alert because we were very concerned about the situation unfolding there. And now the Pentagon has said, look, we're going to continue these provocations. We're going to continue violating the 12-mile zone. And they said they're going to do it twice a quarter, Luke, twice a quarter. So you can guarantee there's going to be at least 8 more opportunities for a false flag event to occur, or even a real live fire, mishap, if you will.
Now, obviously, this situation is very important because the Chinese said, do not mess with our international territory. Do not mess with our land. The U.S. said, yeah, we're going to do it, and then we're going to do it again and again. Do you know if Australia is doing that with China in cooperation with each other or against each other?
Well, they're doing it in cooperation. Just like China came here to Jacksonville, they docked at the port there. They had a goodwill call, and the Chinese went to Disneyland, and they did all the fun stuff that whatever tourists do. So this is a direct coordinated event that has been on the schedule with China and Australia. But nonetheless, you know that there's crazies in government that if they have an opportunity to press a button, they will. And if somebody wants to sabotage something at any moment, look at the Gulf of Tonkin. I mean, there are opportunities that will present themselves in the coming weeks.
That is very true, and we definitely have to keep an eye out on that. One thing that you have been doing a really good job at is that you've been covering a lot of the troop movements, and you can tell a lot what the United States government is thinking when it comes to their foreign policy when they're moving their troops around to potential dangerous areas. What have you been seeing lately, and what do you think is happening with the latest troop movements?
Well, if the first thing you need to concentrate on is what NATO is doing and what NATO is saying. Because NATO is like the ugly stepchild that does the bidding of the United States. So you have Jens Stoltenberg, who is the chief of NATO, and he goes out and he's been visiting with Obama, and he goes out and makes all these stump speeches and says, hey, he's called Russia. He has straight up called Russia the new threat. The Russian aggression is the new threat that we must prepare for. So Trident Juncture is the new military exercise that is taking place right now in Europe. 35,000 troops are stationed all throughout Europe doing military exercises, military drills. I mean, we just covered a story just the other week where they were setting up concentration camps in, I think it was in Poland or Spain, and then the Italians are also up there doing all kinds of military exercises over the skies. But here's where it gets interesting. While all this is taking place, NATO has said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to actually consider permanent stationing of troops along the Russian border. Now, this is a direct violation to a treaty between NATO and Russia. Russia says, no, you guys can't do that. That is a violation, and if you do so, we're going to act. So you have to keep your eyes close to what NATO is doing, what they're saying, and right now they are waving a big stick, 35,000 troops, and actually threatening permanent station on the Russian border.
Wow. Now, obviously, the tensions and the rhetoric is heating up all over the world, and it looks like what some people are saying, other people are also fear-mongering this, but obviously with all the news that we're breaking down, it seems like we're almost the brink of a World War III scenario between these two major superpowers, whether it's the United States and Russia, and then the United States and China. And as we know, China and Russia do have very good relations against each other. It seems like something is coming to a head. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think that this could possibly spark World War III?
Well, I think that if you look at history, there's always these little events that build up to the big war. And I think what we're looking at right now, I mean, I've even said that this is World War III. We're watching it right now unfold before our very eyes. Now, World War III is not going to be like, okay, I mean, when you think of World War III, you think mushroom clouds, you think ballistic missiles, you think all these crazy things we've seen in Hollywood. But it doesn't have to be like that. You know, when history is finally written by, the people in their lofty, professor, offices or whatever, they're going to say it started in Syria. They're going to say it started in the South China Sea. They're going to say it started in the Sea of Japan with all these provocations that are building up to that very moment. Now, just because you don't see troops on the battlefields engaging doesn't mean that we're not in World War III. Like I just mentioned, Trident Juncture, 35,000 troops of 36 different nations, including the United States, are actually on the battlefield now. And they're shooting, they have artillery, they have tanks, they have everything that you need to start a war, and they're shooting it at each other, practicing for war. So just because they're not shooting at the Russians yet doesn't mean we're not there.
Yeah, and we're already in a proxy war against Russia when it comes to what's happening in Syria. I mean, you have Iran, Iraq, Syria, Russia, China, and Jordan trying to keep Assad in power, fighting against ISIS. Meanwhile, we have Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Israel, and the United States supporting the rebels with troops on the ground. It's already a proxy war. We're going to get into that and a lot more on Gary's channel on the Next News Network. You can click in the annotation and watch it. Don't forget to subscribe to Gary. He's been in this as long as I have been, and I definitely trust all his news that he's been reporting. It's sourced, it's documented, and he also has a bunch of great videos from the field that you won't see anywhere else. Well, so check out Gary's channel. We're going to continue the conversation there.
We Are Change on YouTube, Next News Network, too. So go check them out. Now here's one. This one out of Business Insider, Ben Carson. Here's the evidence that China is involved in Syria. And, you know, you got to give credit where credit is due. The campaign of Republican presidential hopeful Ben Carson is hitting back at criticism over a comment he made during Tuesday night's debate about China being involved in the conflict in Syria. Carson's debate comment came in response to a question about President Barack Obama's decision to send 50 members of Special Operation Forces to Syria to keep the 10,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan past the end of his presidency. The retired neurosurgeon said that having U.S. Special Ops forces in Syria is better than not having them there, and then noted that Syria is a very complex place, meaning we're battling with China and Russia over power, which I think is a bad move to make when we're not really economically strong and we don't have anything backing our dollar anymore, nor do we have the confidence in the world. You know the Chinese are there as well as the Russians, and you have all kinds of factions there, Carson said. The remarks spawned criticism from foreign policy experts and scribes who cast doubt on Carson's assertion. On Thursday night, Carson's campaign pushed back on that criticism. It sent a memo to Business Insider clarifying why Carson said China has a presence in Syria, where the regime of President Bashar al-Assad has been fighting rebel and jihadist groups to maintain his grip on power since the country's civil war began in 2011. Give me a second here. Page isn't wanting to move. There we go. China has had long-standing and well-documented security ties to Syria, provided various military weapons and equipment that Syria is using in the current conflict. The statement said Dr. Carson does not believe China is currently fighting in or deploying troops to Syria, and contrary to press reports, he has never made that assertion. And whether they're there providing support or they're just providing weaponry, they and the Russians have a major interest in not allowing the U.S. to go further. This one that was out of the Saker. Did Russia just gently threaten the U.S.? Putin added that the U.S. was clearly attempting to change the world's military balance. Says here, interesting stuff today. Major Russian TV channel just aired a report about Putin meeting with his top military commanders. I don't have the time to translate what Putin said word for word, but basically he said that the U.S. had refused every single Russian offer to negotiate about the U.S. anti-missile system in Europe. and that while the U.S. had initially promised that the real target of the system was Iran, now that the Iranian nuclear issue had been solved, the U.S. was still deploying the system. Putin added that the U.S. was clearly attempting to change the world's military balance, and then Russian footage showed this. According to the Kremlin, it was a mistakenly leaked secret document. And just to make sure that everybody got it, RT wrote a full article in English about this. And basically, it was a new drone or something, drone sub. It says here the presentation slide titled Ocean Multi-Purpose System Status 6 showed some drawing of new nuclear submarine weapon system. It is apparently designed to bypass NATO radars and any existing missile defense system, while also causing heavy damage to important economic facilities along the enemy's coastal regions. The footnote to the slide stated that Status 6 is intended to cause assured unacceptable damage to any adversary force its detonation in the area of the enemy coast would result in extensive zones of radioactive contamination that would ensure the region would not be used for military, economic, business, or other activity for a long time. According to the blurred information provided in the slide, the system represents a massive torpedo designated as self-propelled underwater vehicle with a range of up to 10,000 kilometers and capable of operating at a depth of 1,000 meters. Actually, such ideas are nothing new. The late Andrei Sakharov had already proposed a similar idea to basically wipe out the entire U.S. East Coast. The Russians have also looked into the possibility to detonate a nuclear device to set off the Yellowstone caldera. So I'm getting all kinds of updates here. And basically destroy most of the U.S. in one shot. While the early years following World War II, the Soviets did look into all sorts of schemes to threaten the USA with destruction. The subsequent development of Soviet nuclear capabilities made the development of this type of doomsday weapons useless. Personally, I don't believe for 1 second that the Russians are now serious about developing such systems, as it would be literally a waste of resources. So what's going on here? The so-called leak of secret documents is, of course, no leak at all. This is completely deliberate action. To imagine that a Russian journalist could just by mistake film a secret document helpfully held up for him by a general and then just walk away, get it past his editor, and air it is laughable. And I really don't know, because in extreme tense global situations where countries are basically at each other's necks, global arm buildup is one of the key things. Basically, I want to be able to attack them before they can even have a chance to attack back, is the name of the game. And we've seen in the past that there are some people around the world that are going to be crazy. Again, why governments aren't usually a great thing where they take everybody's wealth and make weapons to destroy the world. A lot of these weapons wouldn't be possible because you wouldn't be able to steal a whole nation's wealth to build these things. What's going on with China, Russia, and the U.S. and the Middle East is really grasping for that shift of power. Whether the U.S. can keep a hold of it or not, I think is going to start playing out. And it also, I think, might not play out to their favor if we look at Europe. Because this whole immigration problem can, in turn fire back on us because the U.S. has been so involved and destabilized so many countries. And yes, Europe has played their little part in it too. But for the most part, U.S. is going to take all the blame. In this immigration problem that is now causing a lot of problems. And it's not immigration, but it's extremists blending in with the true immigrants. And 4 minutes ago, I got from Fox News breaking news: at least 100 reportedly killed by gunmen inside Paris concert hall. Let me bring up Drudge real quick, get an update on that. Says here around 100 people were killed in an attack on the Bataclan concert venue in Paris. On Friday night, police sources said 30 suspected jihadists were killed when police stormed the venue. And CBS News out of Washington.cbslocal.com. CBS News: at least 60 killed in coordinated Paris attacks. That part hasn't been updated. But there was a part in here. Let me see if I can find it. I don't want to keep you guys waiting. You can read all the updates, but oh, here it is. A mandatory curfew has been instituted in Paris. This is the first mandatory curfew in Paris since 1944. ISIS celebrates Paris in flames. This out of Vocative.com. ISIS supporters are already celebrating the Paris attacks. ISIS adherents celebrate the deadly coordinated attacks across Paris late Friday, creating hashtags within minutes of the violence, hailing Paris in flames and declaring ISIS is attacking Paris. Vocative discovered, "Oh, Crusaders, we are coming to you with bombs and rifles," a top propagandist for the unofficial ISIS media wing tweeted in Arabic. He ended the tweet ominously, "Wait for us." The infidels were happy in the liberating of Sinjar at the morning, and at night they slapped themselves for Paris, declares another tweet discovered by Vocative Deep Web Analysis. Other ISIS adherents encouraged the terror organization to take official responsibility for the deadly attacks. Attacks in at least 6 different locations Now, if this doesn't take forever to load. No, it's not one to load. Here's one. Maybe it's not going to load either. Huh? What is going on here? Let's try this again. Okay, get these to load now. There it goes. The latest update from AP, Associated Press. A French police official says at least 100 people have been killed inside a Paris concert hall where attackers seized hostages. The hostage taking was one in a series of at least 6 attacks across the French capital. A French government official says the country's state of emergency has gone into effect and that President François Hollande is canceling his trip to the G20 meeting in Turkey. Hollande is due to leave Saturday for the meeting in Turkey, which was to focus in large part on growing fears of terrorism carried out by Islamic extremists. The official, who is not authorized to be named, said the government will hold a defense council meeting in the morning. Two Paris police officials say security forces have ended their assault on a concert hall filled with hostages, killing at least 2 attackers. Neither official would be named, citing ongoing operations throughout the city. One official described carnage inside the building, saying the attackers had tossed explosives at the hostages. Both officials said they expected the toll of victims to rise. And really, I think you're going to see a lot more of this. I think we're going to see something that we can't predict what the outcome, what this is going to turn into. But could this really truly be the beginning of World War III? I think it's a possibility. I think we're headed more that direction. Again, this whole political correctness. So don't hate on the refugees. Just let them in mass droves, not knowing who the hell is coming in, and that that they say in the Middle East there's magazines and everything talking about how they're infiltrating the West, that they've got crap loads of people. And well, we're not supposed to talk about that because we would be harming the rest of them that are here for good. Well, how many are here for good? We don't know. We don't know. They don't know. No one knows. I really do believe that we are slowly on that path to a world war. Russia, China, all of Europe, what's going on in the Middle East, our situation here at home, authoritarian crackdowns across the world. I think we're really working on it. Now, let me see if I... I don't know if I have this clip up right now. channel, so. This kind of has to do with Syria. This is a quick clip from Ben Swan here. Republican candidates make no sense on Syria. And, you know, we look at all these people that we're looking at in the election, left and right. They all want war. Why do they want war? I think because they understand we're already on that path of war. Now we have to build up to defend ourselves. And that's a scary thing to think that we might be so far ahead already into this that you can't stop it anymore. Look at how many immigrants are already in Europe. Look how many possible immigrants are already here in America through our southern border. Can't get across the northern border, but the southern border is wide open. No, we don't want any Canadians and Americans going across the border too freely. But when we have evidence of Middle Eastern, Asian, and Hispanic and Latinos, all of them, it's not just Hispanic and Latinos. You know, there is evidence that there has been, you know, Islamic extremists, the terrorist type ones that are looking to wage a holy war. There's evidence that, you know, reading material and things have been found down by the southern border. But let's go ahead and get into this here.
Centered around the issue of Syria, U.S. intervention, defeating ISIS, and even Russia. But do these candidates even know what they're talking about? This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else. Well, when it comes to the issue of Syria, 8 different Republican candidates for president, and you get 8 different answers.
The first thing I would do is I wouldn't arm our enemies. I wouldn't arm ISIS. Most of the people who want the no-fly zone also favored arming the allies of al-Qaeda, which became ISIS. That was the dumbest, most foolhardy notion, and most of the people up here supported it. They wanted to arm the allies of al-Qaeda. Some of them still do. That's how ISIS grew. We pushed back Assad, and ISIS was allowed to grow in the vacuum. So the first thing you do is don't arm your enemies.
So let's reality check these guys here, because Senator Paul is correct. Those moderate Syrian rebels trained by the U.S. defected to 2 groups. In 2012 and 2013, they were defecting to al-Nusra Front, the Syrian wing of al-Qaeda. Then in 2014 and 2015, they began defecting to ISIS. Maybe the most high profile of those defectors, Gomurad Kalemov, who boasts about being trained by U.S. forces in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and being trained by Blackwater.
And the threat to the homeland relates to the fact that we've not dealt with this threat of terror in the Middle East. We should have a no-fly zone in Syria. We should have a support for the remnants of the Syrian Free Army and create safe zones.
Well, the Syrian Free Army that Bush mentioned there, well, first of all, it's the FSA, or the Free Syrian Army, and it doesn't exist anymore. As for those so-called moderate trained rebels in Syria that Bush wants to protect, well, that program was an utter failure. The program was abandoned outright last month with only 190 rebels ever trained, only about half of them ever getting as far as Syria. Despite this, the Pentagon still managed to blow through most of that $500 million budget, capping out at $384 million spent. That's over $2 million per trainee. Well, then the conversation turned to stopping Russia from fighting ISIS in Syria. Ben Carson made the issue more about Russia than ISIS.
What we have to recognize is that Putin is trying to really spread his influence throughout the Middle East. This is going to be his base. And we have to oppose him there in an effective way.
As far as Syria, I like if Putin wants to go in, and I got to know him very well because we were both on 60 Minutes. We were stablemates, and we did very well that night. But you know that. But if Putin wants to go and knock the hell out of ISIS, I am all for it 100%, and I can't understand how anybody would be against it.
Well, there you had the other side. Donald Trump asking the question, why wouldn't we allow Russia to fight ISIS, to use their weapons, their soldiers, their money to push ISIS out of Syria? And by the way, the Russians are winning. Assisted by Russian airstrikes, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's army broke an ISIS siege at a key airbase in Aleppo province just on Tuesday. That had been ongoing since 2013. They liberated nearly 1,000 Syrian troops, and they also demonstrated that Putin's airstrikes may have tipped the scale against ISIS in Syria. So what you need to know is that U.S. foreign policy in Syria has become so convoluted that the majority of the people who claim they want to lead it don't even understand it. Do you? Well, try to follow me here. We want to fight ISIS while also fighting Assad in Syria, even though ISIS is fighting against Assad in Syria. And the Russians, they're helping Syria fight ISIS, so we might have to fight Russia to stop them from fighting with Syria against ISIS. If all of that sounds insane to you, that's because it is. That's Reality Check. Let's talk about that tonight on Twitter.
And, you know, we said this before. If Russia wants to be the ones to get themselves tangled up in that whole mess, we should back out. Ron Paul's basically said the same thing. They are doing something that they know exactly what they're doing. They're showing that they can be effective when the U.S. is not. Why? Because they're not trying to destabilize. But the moment that their operation starts to cause more war rather than, you know, stopping war, they'll be in that same mess. Meaning, make sure Assad can, you know, handle his borders and then back off. Don't try to chase ISIS around the world. Don't try to chase ideology around the world. Don't allow it to grow into, you know, other places, but don't, you know, chase it. Because that only empowers it. That's what the U.S. has done. Okay, let me get into this article. This was out of Truth and Media, so give me a second here. This is Dunnigan, Barry Dunnigan, Truth and Media. U.S. should sit back and let Putin destroy ISIS in Syria. The rise of ISIS in the destabilized areas connecting Syria, Libya, and Iraq, much of the territory of which once made up the meat of a historical region referred to as the Levant, unfolded largely due to U.S. foreign policy blunders. Secular strongmen Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, and Bashar al-Assad had kept radical Islamist forces in check in Iraq, Libya, and Syria, respectively, before they found themselves on American neoconservative, somewhat arbitrary, and clearly ill-advised hit list. With Hussein and Gaddafi gone and Assad struggling, ISIS emerged as professional terrorists from around the world have flooded into the region, tapped into the anger of once marginalized Sunni minorities, and obtained advanced U.S. weaponry and military hardware through misguided American intelligence programs aimed at strengthening unverifiable moderate rebels against secular strongmen that had previously prevented terrorist uprising. Meanwhile, ISIS has become an enemy to nearly all of its neighbors, which unfortunately for the U.S. consists largely of military forces that American leaders also consider enemies, making it impossible for the U.S. to create a local and regional coalition to take out ISIS. America's main military ally against ISIS in the region is the weak Iraqi government that it has attempted to prop up and duct tape back together after a prolonged military occupation that created mistrust among locals. Putin's Russia, on the other hand, which was reportedly victimized by what ISIS claims was a terrorist attack on a Russian airliner, started an air assault on ISIS on September 30th to support the terror group's regional enemies. Consequently, a coalition of Syrian government forces, Hezbollah, Iran, and Russia, a list of groups that the U.S. politicians consider enemies and thus cannot assist, won the first major victory against ISIS earlier this week by liberating a once besieged key airbase in Syria's Aleppo province, lending credibility to the notion that Putin's strikes have turned the tides against ISIS in Syria. U.S. media jumped all over the story of only one high-profile terrorist possibly being targeted by a U.S. drone strike while completely ignoring that Russian forces helped to end this week an ISIS siege on a key airbase in Aleppo, wrote Ben Swan in a Friday report on the U.S. effort to target ISIS propagandist Jihadi John. Swan also noted that the CBS 46 reality check video seen below that the convoluted and insane foreign policy of most leading Republican presidential candidates, aside from Donald Trump and Senator Rand Paul, can be described as neoconservative-leaning GOP candidates want to fight ISIS while also fighting Assad in Syria, even though ISIS is fighting against Assad in Syria and the Russians are helping Syria fight ISIS. So the U.S. may have to fight Russia to stop them from fighting with Syria against ISIS. Did you follow along with all that? Meaning, really, in the end, America should probably just back out because they're not going to win either way. Neocons have floated the idea of ordering a no-fly zone over Syria, where Russian bombers are currently running sorties successfully targeting ISIS, which would put the brakes on Putin's assault on ISIS and replace it with World War III-style tensions between the U.S. and Russia. Presidential candidate Donald Trump, however, said, if Putin wants to beat the hell out of ISIS, I'm all for it 100%. I can't understand how anyone would be against it. According to Breitbart, Trump explained earlier this year, let Syria and ISIS fight. Why do we care? Let ISIS and Syria fight, and let Russia, they're in Syria already, let them fight ISIS. Look, I don't want ISIS. ISIS is bad. They're evil. When they start doing with the head chopping and drowning of these are really bad dudes. So I don't want them, but let them fight it out. Let Russia take care of ISIS. How many places can we be? Letting Putin take out ISIS would not be an abdication of American leadership. There is no American leadership in the region to abdicate. We have worn out our welcome with sorry, page won't move down here. Whoa, there it went. Schizophrenic efforts to arm non-vetted moderate rebels who repeatedly turn out to be recruitment centers for ISIS fighters that are beheading everyone in sight in the region. We have decapitated the leadership of the few forces in the region that previously kept radical Islamists at bay. Now, the groups that have the ability to do it are U.S. enemies with whom we cannot cooperate without a diplomatic realignment that hawkish American politicos will not support. Russia, on the other hand, has built a coalition with Syria's government, Iran, and Hezbollah that is making serious progress against ISIS. In just a few short weeks, let's leave Syria alone and let Putin finish what he has started. Not only will it result in this decimation of ISIS, but it will do so without forcing the U.S. to borrow more from China to pay for it. And honestly, that sounds perfectly reasonable to me. Why? Why are we there? Here is one last one I'll get into here. Lofty, dear neocon Rand Paul's right about military spending. I think I covered this last broadcast, but I'm going to go over it again. During the recent Fox Business News Wall Street Journal Republican primary debate, United States Senator Marco Rubio and Rand Paul had what was probably one of the most meaningful exchanges so far in the race to decide the party's nominee for president. Paul and Rubio traded jabs over military spending, issue that has divided many in the Republican Party, and there's little consensus on who won the exchange. That being said, the neoconservatives like Rubio are wrong when it comes to military spending, and it's time the Republican Party as a whole realizes it. Let's be clear about something. When Paul says you're not a serious conservative if you're willing to spend another $1 trillion on a loan from China on the Department of Defense, he says so because DOD is rife with fraud and waste. For example, the DOD spent $2 million for every one Syrian rebel they trained. Guess what? The majority of them never showed up to fight on our behalf after being trained. That's right, $2 million on to train one person that never showed up. The DOD also spent $43 million to build one single gas station in Afghanistan, which will never be used. If that wasn't enough, Congress recently pushed $436 million on weapons that military experts expectedly say are not needed. Yes, managing our military is one of the few roles the federal government performs today with actual constitutional authority to do so, but does that mean they should continue to receive blank checks? The DOD clearly has money to flush down the toilet, and the American taxpayers are ultimately responsible for that money. How is that conservative trust knowing a government to operate efficiently, but believe the DOD is infallible? If you're serious about cutting the deficit and tackling our national debt, then understand the simple fact government by design creates waste. The DOD isn't exempt from that fact. Neocons need to stop pretending defense spending is untouchable in order to pacify the multi-billion-dollar defense contractors that lobby them for tax dollars that are not needed to secure our well-being. Even the United States Army agrees. You are either serious and principled about cutting waste, or you are not. And when you are not, liberal Democrats then get to say, well, you spent money we didn't have on this, so we want more welfare. The same goes for the Constitution. When Republicans ignore the Fourth Amendment and push the NSA, Democrats get to ignore the 10th Amendment and push the EPA. In Washington, I think they call this bipartisanship. And again, that was by Michael Lofty. And you can find that on Truth and Media. Lofty, dear neocons, Rand Paul's right on military spending. And, you know, we wouldn't want to think too libertarian about things like this. How much money is government wasting of your tax dollars? All of it. And then they're borrowing more to waste a good amount of that. Very little of it ever makes it back to the people. If you look at the complete spending of everything, yeah, we're headed that direction. We're headed a direction where we are going to be enslaved by our own unintelligent decisions. Definitely when you look at these, marches going on with the students. We want free education. We want free. Everybody's going to have a damn degree. You're going to be taxed at probably a good 70%, including the 1%. It's probably going to be taxed at 80%. Most of the wealthy people are going to flee the country to somewhere where they're not going to have their wealth stolen from them. The smart people that can and already have wealth are going to be the ones to do that. All these other, even if they are very intelligent, got these degrees, you're not going to be able to get a job, you're not going to be able to gain wealth, and you're not going to be able to escape where you can keep your wealth. You will be trapped in basically an enslaved nation. And we see that places. You look at the extreme that it gets to, you can look at places like North Korea, where you basically have to, even if you don't believe it, say that your leader is God, so you will get your rice and your meat, whatever it may be. Everybody lives in a condo. Hey, kind of sounds like what's happening on the West Coast. Everybody lives in a little tiny box called a condo or apartment or whatever they want to call it. A green. West Coast is just going to call them green housing. You're going to help save the earth by living in this little tiny shipping container because, that's cool. And I've seen shipping container homes that have been built that are big and they're cool. But no, they're literally going to be one shipping container per family. You see all these nations that are starting to compete with the U.S. for freedom, economic prosperity. Even if they are not moving that far or that fast in the direction of more freedom, they are moving towards that direction. And because we're moving at such an extreme rate, the opposite direction, we're seeing the wealth shedding from the country. And it's a little bit different than watching a country grow in wealth. See a country grow in wealth, you're like, oh, they grew a little bit. Oh, they're pausing, yeah. Oh, they're growing a little bit. Oh, they're pausing. Well, when you lose it, you start losing it fast. And that's a shock to the system. And then you get the uneducated, the ignorant people that call for everything to be free because they can't afford it because they've allowed the government to get this big. And what are they doing? They're calling for government to have more control, to take more things from more people, to give you a breadcrumb, a penny. Those degrees aren't going to mean anything when you're calling for government to tax people. And again, if you look at the facts, you tax the 1% at 100% their wealth. Stay tuned.